If you've ever been pulled over, you know that sinking feeling when you see those flashing lights in your rearview mirror. Your heart races, your palms get sweaty, and you immediately start wondering what you did wrong. But here's something most people don't realize. Sometimes it's not you who's doing something wrong. Sometimes it's the officer. I'm going to walk you through 10 things that police officers do during traffic stops that are actually illegal, and understanding these can protect your rights the next time you're pulled over. Let's start with something that happens more often than you think: extending the traffic stop beyond its original purpose. Picture this scenario. An officer pulls you over for a broken taillight. That's a legitimate reason for a stop. But then, after dealing with the taillight issue, instead of letting you go, the officer starts asking you questions that have nothing to do with your taillight. Where are you going? Where are you coming from? Can I search your vehicle? This is where things get legally problematic. The Supreme Court has been very clear about this. In a case called Rodriguez versus United States, the court ruled that once the purpose of the traffic stop has been completed, the officer cannot extend the stop to investigate other potential crimes without reasonable suspicion. So if your taillight issue is resolved, your license and registration check out, and your citation is written, the officer cannot keep you there to go on a fishing expedition. The moment that traffic stop is complete, you have the right to leave. If an officer extends that stop without reasonable suspicion of another crime, they're violating your Fourth Amendment rights. The second illegal thing officers do is conduct searches without proper consent or probable cause. Let me be really clear about this because it's crucial. An officer cannot search your vehicle just because they want to. They need either your consent, probable cause, or a warrant. Now, here's where officers often push the boundaries. They'll ask you, "Do you mind if I search your vehicle?" And the way they ask makes it sound like you don't really have a choice. But you do. You absolutely do. Unless they have probable cause, like they smell marijuana or they see drug paraphernalia in plain view, they cannot search your car without your permission. And if you say no, that refusal cannot be used as probable cause. Your constitutional right to refuse a search is protected. Officers who search your vehicle after you've clearly refused consent and when they don't have probable cause are conducting an illegal search. Any evidence they find during that illegal search can potentially be thrown out of court. Number 3, demanding your identification when you're a passenger. This one surprises a lot of people. If you're a passenger in a vehicle that gets pulled over, in most states, you don't have to provide identification to the officer. The driver does, because they're operating the vehicle. But you, as a passenger, generally have no legal obligation to identify yourself unless the officer has reasonable suspicion that you specifically have committed, are committing, or are about to commit a crime. Now, I say generally because a handful of states have different rules. But in the majority of the country, if you're sitting in the passenger seat and an officer demands your ID without any reason to suspect you of wrongdoing, that's an illegal demand. You can politely decline and ask if you're free to leave. Fourth on our list, ordering you out of your car without justification. Officers do have the legal authority to order you out of your vehicle during a traffic stop. That part is legal. It comes from a Supreme Court case called Pennsylvania versus Mims. However, once you're out of the vehicle, what happens next matters legally. If an officer orders you out and then immediately starts patting you down or searching you without reasonable suspicion that you're armed and dangerous, that's illegal. The officer needs to be able to articulate specific facts that made them believe you posed a threat. They can't just pat down everyone they pull out of a car. That's called a Terry frisk, and it requires reasonable suspicion of danger. Without that, any pat down is a violation of your rights. Let's talk about number 5, using drug dogs to extend a traffic stop. This ties back to what we discussed earlier about extending stops, but it deserves its own mention because it happens so frequently. An officer pulls you over, and while they're supposedly writing your ticket, you notice they've called for a K-9 unit. Here's what the law says. If the drug dog arrives and completes its sniff before the traffic stop would have naturally ended, that's legal. But if the officer makes you wait around after the stop should have been completed just so the dog can arrive, that's illegal. The Supreme Court was explicit about this. Police cannot extend a traffic stop to wait for a drug dog unless they have independent, reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. So if your ticket is written, your paperwork is done, and the officer is making you sit there waiting for a dog, your rights are being violated. Number 6, and this is a big one, threatening arrest for minor infractions. Some officers use the threat of arrest as a coercion tactic during traffic stops. You've probably heard stories about this. Someone refuses to answer questions or refuses a search, and suddenly the officer says something like, "If you don't cooperate, I'm going to arrest you." For most minor traffic infractions, like speeding or a broken taillight, arrest is not an appropriate response. While technically, in many jurisdictions, officers have the discretion to arrest for any offense committed in their presence, using arrest as a threat to coerce cooperation or consent is improper and can constitute coercion. If you consent to a search only because an officer threatened to arrest you otherwise, that consent isn't truly voluntary, and any evidence found might be suppressible in court. Moving on to number 7, searching your phone without a warrant. Your cell phone is essentially your entire life in your pocket. Photos, messages, emails, banking information, medical records, it's all there. And the Supreme Court recognizes how sensitive this information is. In a case called Riley versus California, the court held that police generally need a warrant to search your cell phone even if you've been arrested. So, during a traffic stop, if an officer demands to look through your phone unless you consent or there are extreme exigent circumstances, they need a warrant. Officers who grab your phone during a traffic stop and start scrolling through it are violating your Fourth Amendment rights. Don't unlock your phone. Don't provide your passcode. You have the right to refuse, and you should exercise that right. Number 8, retaliating against you for asserting your rights. This is perhaps one of the most insidious illegal actions that can occur during a traffic stop. Let's say you politely refuse a search. You decline to answer questions beyond providing your license and registration. You assert your constitutional rights in a calm and respectful manner. And then suddenly, the officer's whole demeanor changes. They become aggressive, they find additional infractions to cite you for, or they make the stop take much longer than necessary. This is retaliation, and it's illegal. Courts have repeatedly held that officers cannot punish you for exercising your constitutional rights. If an officer's actions during a traffic stop change dramatically after you assert your rights, and those actions seem punitive rather than based on legitimate law enforcement purposes, that officer may be engaging in illegal retaliation. Number 9 involves something called a pretextual stop. This is when an officer uses a minor traffic violation as an excuse to pull you over when their real motivation is to investigate something else entirely. Now, here's where this gets complicated legally. The Supreme Court has said that pretextual stops are generally permissible as long as the officer actually observed a traffic violation. However, if the traffic violation is fabricated, or if the officer has no reasonable basis for believing a violation occurred, then the stop itself is illegal. For example, if an officer pulls you over claiming you didn't use your turn signal when you absolutely did, and they're using that false claim as a pretext to investigate you for other crimes, that's an illegal stop. Everything that flows from an illegal stop can potentially be challenged in court. And finally, number 10, conducting a stop based solely on racial profiling. This should go without saying, but it needs to be said because it still happens. An officer cannot pull you over based on your race, ethnicity, or national origin. If an officer stops you and the only reason, or even a substantial reason, is because of your racial or ethnic identity, that is not only illegal, it's a violation of your constitutional right to equal protection under the law. The problem is that racial profiling can be difficult to prove because officers will often articulate some other reason for the stop. But if you believe you were racially profiled, it's important to document everything about the stop, including the officer's statements, and to report it to the appropriate authorities. There are civil rights attorneys who specialize in these cases. So there you have it, 10 things that police officers do during traffic stops that are actually illegal. Now, I want to be clear about something. Most police officers are professionals who respect constitutional rights and do their jobs properly. But understanding your rights is essential because even good officers can make mistakes. And unfortunately, there are some officers who deliberately push or cross legal boundaries. If you find yourself in a situation where an officer is doing any of these things, remain calm, be respectful, but clearly assert your rights. Don't physically resist, even if you know the officer is wrong. Assert your rights verbally and then document everything. Write down what happened as soon as you can, get any witness information, and if the violation was serious, consult with an attorney who specializes in criminal defense or civil rights. Your rights exist to protect you, but they only work if you know them and if you exercise them. Stay informed, stay safe, and remember, knowing your rights isn't about being difficult or uncooperative. It's about ensuring that the law applies equally to everyone, including those who enforce it. If this video helped you and you want to learn more about dealing with police or getting legal help, click the link in the description below.